Roll, please.
I first was approached about this movie by two of the producers, Wick Godfrey and Isaac Klausner. They just asked me if I was interested in Nil Armstrong, and I wasn't really sure, to be honest, at first, if it was a subject matter I wanted to dive into.
3, 2, 1, maneuver.
A few weeks later, I opened up the book, Jim Henson's biography of Nil, and it just struck me in a way that for some reason hadn't struck me before, just how insane this whole operation really was when you actually look at it at face value. I just became fascinated by where did the willpower to will that into existence come from, and how did it actually become a reality. So I started diving in. I brought on Josh Singer to write the script.
I really was quite taken with all the things I hadn't known about Nil. I didn't know anything about his work on Gemini. I didn't even know he flew X-15s, which are, the coolest flying machine we've ever built. Almost no one knows that he lost a 2-year-old daughter.
We had a swing like that. Yeah, Karen loved it. That's your daughter.
I talked to Ryan before we even started shooting La La Land. I asked him if he'd be interested in playing Nil in this film.
We talked about really trying to replicate the reality of it.
He kind of came at it from his own angle, which was less about the mission and more about the man.
There was a duality to it that's interesting in a cinematic way. The Armstrongs experience a tragedy that's unfathomable. Nil's sort of left looking for answers that he can't really find on Earth.
That, in a way, kind of became the core of the film, the very sort of inner story of this individual who struggled with tremendous loss on his way to the moon.
There's a deeper need for Nil to succeed at this than just to succeed.
We're full steam ahead for Apollo. You good with that?
Yes, sir.
It's about him as a human being and what it means to make such extraordinary strides for humankind. And it's worthwhile looking at the person who was at the center of that.
Done. Very nice. Ready.
I've only worked with Damien on La La Land and on this, but in both cases, the style came from the story.
Let's do one more like this, and then we'll do one where he walks away.
What experience were you trying to create for the audience, And this was about sort of really trying to put the audience in the pilot seat.
You grab it off, you just boom, boom, and then take it under and just stick it under your left thigh.
I wanted every aspect of the film to feel real and lived in and textural, not just the mission, the sequences, but also the stuff on the ground.
We can do this last. We don't need deep for this.
A lot of this is shot in real time. Damien wants to shoot it in that way because it means that you're with the characters.
Let's go to the next one. And action.
You could look at Nil's life and feel like everything was preparing him for this moment. Somehow he was able to balance what he and his family were going through emotionally and still get the job done.
The movie really had to be about the moon and the kitchen. In other words, the two extremes, the cosmic, grand expanse on the one end, but then on the other end, this day-to-day existence that not just Nil and his family, but all the astronauts and their families lived.
Buzz, yeah, that's great.
Lock eyes on Ryan for a moment.
I think this was a different experience for Damien and I because we felt, and rightfully so, a responsibility to accuracy and to try and honor the people who experienced it so that the audience could experience it that way as well.
Cut.
The idea that an event of this magnitude, an event that seems this big screen ready, hasn't really been portrayed in a feature or theatrical film before, that sort of blew my mind.
It's such a remarkable story. I'm surprised that it hasn't been told before.
For the most famous event in world history, it's actually shocking how little known the particulars of the event actually are and how little known the man who took those first steps actually is.
Set. And background.
Lena's just a little steadier. Let's do one more set of those looks, Ryan. And action.
What's so interesting about Nil Armstrong other than he stepped on the moon?
Armstrong. It's a story about a bunch of people who decide that they want to go get on the top of these giant rocket ships and land on the moon and walk around, right? It's impossible. It can't happen. No one can do that. Well, these guys made it happen.
And then when I hear Damien's take on that,
I I really wanted to know what it felt like to be that first man putting the footprint on the moon.
The way it's written and the way that Ryan plays it, I think is so true.
When I actually start doing the work and looking at what Nil had to endure, I see this actually is a pretty inspiring story, although not one that you would necessarily have thought to tell 5 or 10 or 15 years ago.
Someone so well-known could still be so unknown. That seems strange. He did avoid the limelight. He was extremely humble and deeply focused. After reading James Hansen's book, I realized just how complicated and emotional and unique this story really was, so I felt really lucky to get to be a part of it.
I wouldn't have wanted to do this if I thought somehow we were violating Nil's legacy in some significant way, or the family was totally against it, and they haven't been.
I think he was reaching a stage in his life where he thought maybe a movie would help ignite interest in space in a way that he felt like it wasn't at the time.
Because I know that the commitment of Josh and Damien to getting it right, getting it as authentic as possible.
Nil done such risky flights.
It sort of required Damien's initial instinct of this is where the story is. The story is sacrifice. The story is grief and loss. The story is the sweat and tears and blood.
It needs to be shut down.
It's the best simulation we have.
And I think the whole point about this movie is that you're moving through time with Nil as he's progressing to the ultimate goal.
I think we're going to give across that sense of wonder that this farmer from the middle of America flew an X-15, went through all of this, lost a child, lost his friends, walked down a ladder and stepped out on a foreign planet.
I don't think there's a wrong time period to tell this story.
When something is so iconic that it becomes difficult for us to even process it, that's where I became really interested in trying to investigate the reality behind that. We live in a world where people have walked on the moon. We forget just how crazy and hard and radical an enterprise it really was.
The day began for the astronauts. Nil Armstrong, Commander Apollo 11.
Dad was really just a regular guy, and he was pretty funny.
I think most people that knew my father knew that he was a fairly quiet guy, but he could also open up, and he had a great sense of humor. But he had to always balance the responsibilities of the tasks that he was given with his family life and the public life, and that was always a challenge for him.
Part of what's beautiful about Nil and what was important to this movie was that he wasn't someone who necessarily thought of himself as a hero. In many ways, he was a real-life superhero, but in other ways, these were completely ordinary people and often presented themselves as such.
How would you describe the flight?
I could only say it was out of this world.
You know, it's widely known that Nil was this great American hero, but it's not so widely known that he didn't consider himself a hero at all.
We'd like to give a special thanks to all those Americans who built those spacecraft, who did the construction, design, the test.
He was constantly deferring credit to the hundreds of thousands of people that also made this mission possible.
To those people, tonight we give a special thank you.
You had 400,000 people all working incredible hours and putting their best effort into their piece so that it wasn't that failed, that caused us not to get to the moon. And when you have all those people working so hard, committed to something, amazing things can happen.
What's interesting about him as a heroic character study is that, you know, oftentimes when we look into our heroes and we see that they're human, it can be disappointing. But I think Nil's one of the rare cases where his humanity makes him more admirable.
We think of these people as larger than life, as though they just rolled out of bed with greatness in them, and, you know, they went to the moon because it was easy for them. And one thing we wanted to try to show with this movie was that that wasn't the case.
Nil and Janet were just ordinary, hardworking people that were placed in a very extraordinary situation, and they did suffer loss and lost friends, and they encountered many challenges and difficulties along the way, and that they just really wanted to dig deep to make sure that those sacrifices counted for something.
Hi.
Are you okay? Jesus.
Oh, I'm fine.
Nil was someone who was constantly searching for answers. Of course, I think to a large part that can be fueled or catalyzed by tremendous loss.
I just remembered I left something at the office.
Even going back to his Navy days, Dad formed very strong friendships and lost very close friends.
Someone in that position is left at times grappling for answers, grappling for some kind of meaning.
I think he always felt that he needed to redouble his efforts to make sure that the things that he did and the way that he did them would honor those sacrifices.
I think he was constantly trying to just get a new perspective on the universe, and the way he did that was by putting himself on the line and trying to go to that edge. But I think it came from that sort of very human, primal urge to figure out what our place is.
If you just take, for instance, his sentiments on the moon.
That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
He had this incredible ability to see everything in its larger context. He could see a giant leap in one small step. He could see himself as a man representing his country, but also a human being representing mankind. It might be one of the most famous things ever said. It resonated so profoundly at the time, and it still does. It's something that's uniquely Nil. It seemed to permeate the globe with this overwhelming sense of hope. Hope that maybe we had only just begun to scratch the surface of our potential.
It was one of these things that was a fantasy, really, at its core, until it happened. And it happened because of these individuals.
$1,000 feet, switching to lunar mode.
Well, luckily for us, Nil almost killed himself a couple times. And this is one of them.
Control is degrading.
There was a lot of teamwork involved in getting those sequences.
There was a training vehicle called the Lunar Lander Training Vehicle, so they could learn how to fly on the Earth's surface before they got to the moon. He suffered a malfunction of the machine, and it caused him to crash. So rather than die, he ejected pretty low off the ground. It was like 75 feet high when he ejected. And that's what we're simulating here. This particular gag, we hope to have Ryan do himself. So we're going to bring him over and have him test it out. And if he's agreeable, we're going to drag him through the weeds.
Feeling good?
A little bit. It's a weird time to ask me. No.
It was really a healthy combination of stunts and then myself doing some of it as well.
Our first part was showing the craft getting out of shape as it's flying. Now we have to see Nil eject from it. No! We have the wire rig that's taking him out of it. We have the lunar lander is being manipulated at the same time. And we also have the chair that's ejecting him. And then we have the explosion on the ground that we're trying to time in. As soon as he ejects, it's like 2 seconds, 3 seconds maybe, and it hits the ground. Then we go to the landing in the grass with Ryan himself.
There's not a lot of training you can do for being dragged across a field, other than just to be dragged across a field.
We drug him through the grass on the LLTV. He did the landing all himself, being drugged through the grass on the parachute, and I think he liked it.
So we did that.
I'm going to keep it to 2 gusts. I'll just make the 2 gusts bigger. Okay. The biggest thing of that is on landing, he's got to land okay with his feet and set himself up to slide correctly. That's his job. Once he's done that, the rest is kind of autopilot. With the winch program, we can help him slide on the grass. And of course, we police the area, make sure all the sticks and stones and all that are gone. He did it, you know? That's all him.
Okay, 140,000 feet. On your way down.
The ideas for style were coming from trying to replicate the reality of it. We know that Apollo 11 was successful, but at the time there's so much that can go wrong, there's so much at stake.
We show you ballooning, not turning.
It's very hard in a film to visualize and create the experience of the claustrophobia.
What I wanted to tell with the story was just how challenging, how dangerous, how unforeseen this was.
The idea being that the audience is there with you. You experience every creak and sound. You try and understand how vulnerable they were. They were flying blind to a certain degree.
I wanted to really make the audience feel what it must have felt like to be hurled into space in these spacecrafts, how terrifying it was, how rickety these crafts were. You can't believe that people survived in them going down a freeway, let alone going into outer space.
You go to turn it off, and we're going to begin the big roll. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, LED roll.
My team and I started to try to figure out how we're going to make it feel immediate and real, not like a period piece. Very tactile, brutal, visceral, experiential, and kinetic.
We have all these missions to get through. X-15, Gemini, Apollo, landing on the moon.
It was very much about trying to see what they see, hear what they hear, feel what they feel. Very much a POV-driven, first-person, almost kind of virtual reality version of 1960s space travel.
Well, how are we going to do that? Because I'm the designer, like, what's the plan?
I wanted the whole feel of the film to reflect what it must have felt like to be going on these missions.
And shooting with the LED screen was a gift to the actors because in most cases it probably would have been a green screen.
The LED wall is a really good example of incorporating modern-day technology into old film tricks.
You can actually get the image on film through the capsule, but you can also use them to light the set correctly with the correct image of the Earth and the orbit.
Would you look at that?
We designed a system that synchronizes the video of the LED wall to our motion base. It allows us to take the video playback. We import it into our computers that run our motion control system for the platform. And we're able to tie in the video with the base.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Ignition.
Ignition.
Fix program.
Roger, fix program.
We had Seco.
There was a clarity to the light, the color. It was different visually.
We can move the motion base around at any orientation that we want.
Accelerate.
Ready and break.
And it suddenly becomes this sort of experiential thing that we can capture for the actor as well.
It becomes a part of the scene, a part of our performances. It's your ship now.
If a camera's in the spaceship looking out the window at the Earth, and we need to see the actors, the Earth will always track in the window throughout the LED wall as the motion base moves around. That's something that's never been done before.
You see the Earth behind you and you see the moon ahead of you, and it's like this incredible experience.
Neil, we're in a bank.
When you sit inside that spacecraft, they start spinning the LED wall, we start shaking the motion base around.
You start getting it all in camera, ultimately with a gimbal moving with the image, and JD programmed the gimbal so they would move in sync.
This gimbal that we're on would really violently shake and move. Things would spin and the Earth would go by. While physically it's kind of demanding, it makes it feel that much more real.
You get dizzy when you just walk next to that thing.
You want to find the ultimate way of providing the best image to put people in that film.
It was to transport the audience. It's a more fun way to make the film.
Some green screen and there are little X's on there and you're like supposed to watch the X's, pretend like the X's are going by and have reactions. Right now we're just gonna see it.
We were really able to immerse ourselves in that experience.
We tried to make you feel the claustrophobia, to use what you see but also what you don't see, restrict the POV so they feel like they're launching. They feel like they're hovering in space.
It's to find a way to put the audience in the pilot seat. That's a powerful point of view to experience.
All right, here we go. Pretty clear.
And do I take it from coming out?
Tonight we're shooting Nil Armstrong's descent down the ladder, trying to recreate the famous televised footage of him saying the famous line when he stepped on the moon for the first time.
Meeting. Mark.
20 seconds and counting.
We arranged it so that I was able to hear the original comms of Buzz talking to Neil or Mission Control, and we created spaces so that I could say the lines in between.
That's one small step for man. One giant leap for mankind. I'm at the foot of the ladder. The surface appears almost like a powder.
Ready. Bring in the iPad for playback.
Yeah, great.
It's this iconic moment in history, and so we felt a lot of pressure to do it justice and to get the details right.
Keep an eye on your fuel. Continuous burn time is limited to 900 and...
Very surreal to be walking down the ladder, hearing those voices, saying those lines in the suit.
Okay, I just checked coming back up to that first step, Buzz. It's adequate to get back up.
Breathing the oxygen that the suit's providing. It's very hard to explain.
Apollo 11, Houston, we are go for undocking, over.
You saw firsthand how amazing it is that they pulled this off with the technology that they had.
The one real hiccup in the lunar descent were these computer alerts, these 1201 and 1202 computer alerts.
Program alarm.
What's a 1202 alarm? The computers they had there obviously much less powerful than in your microwave, but that was how they got to the moon and back.
Now let's do lights on. We don't have radar data.
They had left a switch on, a radar switch on, and it just overwhelmed the computer. They were descending from lunar orbit down to the surface, and...
Roger, we go on that alarm.
The alarms were blaring, and basically what people realized later was that the computers powering the LEM as it went in for landing just couldn't handle the amount of information.
Suddenly, their computer was not helpful in piloting them down to the surface. They had to do it manually. And then, of course, when they get closer to the surface, the landing area was much rougher terrain than they were expecting.
Houston, Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed.
We'd had the idea, instead of shooting the moon on a stage, to shoot outdoors and shoot at night.
Nathan creates this beautiful moon set, and the set is enormous.
This is my first time landing on the moon, so you always go, well, we need a cement works or a quarry. The quarry was the obvious one for the moon, but we need a great quarry, which is kind of rare. Locations actually found me a great quarry. Practical working quarries usually don't let you through the door. They were willing to sculpt the landscape to our direction to look like the moon.
Locations like that, part of the joy of getting to tell this story.
There was a lot of pressure to get that right.
And we're just trying to be as authentic as possible, but also trying to put a stamp on it that's unique to the movie.
We were shooting with lights that Linus, our cinematographer, had created to try and simulate sunlight. We were shooting with IMAX cameras.
We went through movies and photography from NASA, and the lenses we're using are actually the same lenses that they used on the moon when they took the still photos. We're using the same film stock to shoot the moon.
I was talking with astronauts who had walked on the moon, and they told me it was the most clear-eyed they had ever been in their lives. As though they'd just gotten a shot of adrenaline. It was like an awakened dream. They could hear everything better, they could see everything better, everything was crystal clear, and yet their heart was going a million miles a minute.
We don't want to use CG, and the lunar lander couldn't have stood by itself. It was built for Moon's gravity.
The lunar module is incredibly flimsy piece of machinery. It's designed to be as light as possible.
But you sit with construction, you sit with my teams, and we figure out how to make it structurally sound and safe that someone can get into it and climb the ladder. There's so many logistical items, just even building something that size, trunking it, getting it into the quarry, standing it, making it wind resistant.
In some ways, that sequence, because it was so well documented, there was a lot of material there to guide us and to refer to.
The natural challenges we've had is that it suddenly started to snow, and it's been very, very cold.
On this moon, it's quite cold. The real moon, it varies between super hot and super cold, so maybe a little hostility of the elements is appropriate. It's never about just the technicalities of it. It's all about making the audience feel something. That heightened level of consciousness. Because there is, in history, no more cosmic, grand, expansive adventure. We were very lucky to have a lot of help from NASA and the Air Force.
Shooting in both of those locations, it was incredible to have that access. It was right at the end of the film, so it was interesting having shot the whole film on stages and in places where the film didn't take place, to finally be in these historic locations.
This is not a science fiction story at all. This is very much history.
Being able to shoot in the actual locations, I mean, there's something to that.
It's a more fun way to make the film with the people who were really there, to hear their stories, to have them be involved actively in the shaping of it as well as they were in the shaping of history.
Whenever there's a choice between doing it real and fudging it, the choice has always been made to do it real, and that's pretty impressive.
Cape Canaveral, I mean, that was kind of amazing to shoot there. We were there with our Apollo 11 actors, with Corey Stoll playing Buzz Aldrin, Lucas Haas playing Mike Collins, and Ryan playing Neil, obviously.
See, Mark.
When you've got everybody working together behind the camera and in front of the camera, actually occupying that same space in that same world, it's really helpful. And there's a lot of really intangible things that happen that bring the audience into that world.
I feel really blessed to have gotten to see this stuff. I mean, I feel it's almost changed my life in some ways.
To be in those places where the experience had happened with people who had experienced it was pretty amazing.
We were able to use the actual van that they drove the astronauts to the launching pad that fateful morning.
You see in those old moving pictures of those guys waving and going down, headed towards the rocket. Like I'm the real astronaut. It's so spot on from what the actual experience must have been like.
We were able to use the actual building and doorways and everything that have all been kind of kept exactly as is for that scene as well. And then, of course, the actual crawler that they used to transport the Saturn V.
Jesus, that's a big mother.
The VAB building. You feel lucky enough to just see them, let alone to be able to shoot them.
Every time you look at the monitor, it's exciting because it's the actual thing. I feel like I was there, you know?
Then when we were out at Edwards Air Force Base.
And Joe Engel, who was the last living pilot to fly the X-15, was on set for the days that we were shooting those sequences.
So real.
Yeah, you're liking it?
That's the plane that we see Neil flying in the beginning of the movie, and that plane, that's a whole movie unto itself. That was a plane that looks like it shouldn't fly at all, was dropped from a B-52, powered a rocket up to space, and then flew completely power-free for the rest of its mission. It's just an insane aircraft. To have Joe there and Ryan and all of us shooting again on the actual landing strip where it landed, it was another great moment. That was really cool.
It just was a much more fulfilling experience for us, and I hope that that's translated to the audience as well.
Going to NASA for the first time, it's just an amazing thing to kind of experience firsthand, to see the hallways and rooms where these people worked. Some of the consoles are still there. I mean, to see some of the spacecraft and to see some of the vestiges of what the place was like in the 60s. I really wanted to make sure, or everyone playing an astronaut in the movie got to see that.
There's something about getting to spend time with people who are actively exploring the universe and trying to find the origins of life. It was really inspiring.
Hopefully NASA will get us to Moon, Mars, and whatever from that launch pad.
The idea that I would get to play an astronaut and I would get to go to NASA and have complete access to all of their training tools and all the crazy projects they're working on there, I would have told you you're crazy and that'll never happen. It really is like childhood dream stuff.
Being able to go into Houston and Cape Canaveral, that's just like getting a backstage pass.
As you see those images your whole life, the launch pads and mission control, you know, Houston, we have a problem, all that stuff. To actually be there and see it and experience it in the way that we got to experience it was awesome.
You have to take this home, right?
That's right. Everybody gets one.
Everything in here is from the moon.
This is the Apollo 11 cabinet.
Those visits to NASA, we were able to see sort of some of what they were working on.
Wow, that's incredible. Isn't that amazing?
Yeah, it's so cool. Seeing the Apollo 11 capsule was really wonderful to help ground us in the reality of it.
Just seeing a Saturn V rocket laying on its side, it gives you an idea of what these guys were climbing into and what they were doing.
This is the one engine that would burn to get you on a trajectory to the moon.
When I was first cast in this, the thing I was most excited about was actually going to space camp. You know, since I was a kid, I wanted to do that.
It allows the crew members to work together in an environment that's not natural for them.
We did these tests, all these things that the astronauts do themselves, where they were all training. I mean, it's amazing.
You're gonna go full forward to max.
Do I use the trim for this, or I
Yeah,
just...
you can use the trim.
We did a bunch of time on the pogo training apparatus. Pogo is the one where you're standing upright and you're in the harness, and it basically simulates what it feels like to walk on the moon.
All right, so you are on the moon now. It's a good time to show off with the one-handed push-ups.
And then Argos is where you're laying down and you're in harnesses. It essentially recreates what it feels like to be weightless in space.
The senses that you will get when you touch things is perfect.
Oh, this is great, boys. And they were super generous, you know, driving around in the cars, getting up, you know, in the Mars vehicles.
On board.
They're testing tires and rocks and movement and chassis and alignment.
A rover like this will be suitable for Moon or Mars.
So what would it take to roll this?
We got it rated about 52 degrees.
It was awesome. Like a little car that goes every direction possible.
That was a great first step into the NASA world.
You're good to go.
Wow. It sets a sense of awe, but it also makes it real. It's not like some fantastical, imaginary place. It's actually very practical and hands-on.
I found that environment to be really informative. There's a seriousness about what they were doing, but there was so much joy that they got to do this dream job, all of them. It's very cool.
I got my Halloween costume. It was pretty incredible. 3 days of the research, you don't get a chance to have that very often. It was important for us as far as camaraderie.
It was amazing, the people we got to meet, the personal stories, people who were there on the day. These are things that you just can't make up.
He turned to me and I looked at him and we did one of these. Well, why not?
You could feel the history in there. It was really a moment I'll never forget.
It was a very, very surreal process, sort of an opportunity that I still can't believe I got to have. It's really one of the greatest privileges I've ever had.